Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when this finds you. Hope you're having a great day so far. And just want to talk to you a little bit about America, legal immigration, nepotism, Britain, and slavery. There was a guy, Jacob Green, Reverend Jacob Green, that said, "Can it be believed that a people contending for liberty should, at the same time, be promoting and supporting slavery? In our contest with Britain, much has been said and published in favor of liberty. In what horrid colors has oppression and slavery been painted by us? And is it not a great sin for us to practice it as Britain? Is not the hard yoke of slavery felt by Negroes as well as by white people? Are they not fond of liberty as well as others of the human race? Is not freedom the unalienable right of all? If liberty is one of the natural and unalienable rights of all men, as doubtless it is self evident. Example so clear that it needs proof. How unjust, how inhuman, but actually to violate this right. Britain is attempting to violate it. We in America have a long time been in violation of it. That's the end of that. And so, and just reading that quote right quick from Jacob Green, I just want to talk a bit and about things we've been taught, you, I, generations before us, generations after us. Because if we study the history of the 13 colonies, you would see that they were founded in the 17th and 18th centuries. And see, to me, that sounds just like Columbus discovering America. It's amazing that they can always find and discover occupied lands. And right today, people celebrate the founding fathers and how great they were, even though some of them owned slaves and never sought freedom for blacks that were enslaved, although there was no slavery here before Europeans got here. And right today, Christopher Columbus has a holiday, although he enslaved and murdered a lot of the inhabitants that were already here. Europeans, they want us to celebrate Columbus and his accomplishments, right? Well, think about this for a moment. This dude had to be the worst navigator in the history of mankind if we go with the story we've been fed. He was looking for an alternate route to, was it India? Well, it's in the same continent, India's in the Asian continent. But if he was truly looking for an alternate route, how the hell did he end up in the Bahamas? We were taught that he got lost in his navigation, right? Well, did you ever hear of him getting lost on his return trip home? Nope. Because Columbus never got lost. He was paid and financed to seek out the foreign territories. See, they knew there were other lands that were untouched by European hands and they wanted access to those lands. And see, if you do any type of search or research on the colonies before the 17th century, it's amazing that that part of history is basically hidden. Now, isn't it also amazing that this period was all of a sudden called a colonial period once Europeans got here? It was called a colonial period, and amazingly, everywhere Europeans go, it is always called colonizing. So, just so you don't waste your time looking for what it was called before, it was actually called Turtle Island. That's what the indigenous people called it. See, when Europeans got here, they created Christian run boarding schools, which had an objective and goal to remove all cultural identity and force the indigenous people into European assimilation. See, these schools forced the children, the native children, to speak Europeans' language. They forced them to ignore their own. They forced the native children to learn European culture, ignoring their own. And they gave the natives European names, removing their own. And right now, I'm sure, many of you, especially if you black, you ain't got your original name. You got a English sounding name. It's just like Jones is not my original last name. Y'all have heard me mention that before, and I never did any research on Jones because I don't care about the name Jones in all honesty. Um, but I was talking to a lady once some years ago. She said, "Oh, Jones is I believe she said a Welsh last name." I said, "I couldn't tell you where it originated from. I just know it ain't mine." And she was trying to make a connection, but don't try to make a connection with me, using the name Jones. Please don't do that. All you're gonna do is upset and aggravate me. But I'm sure around this country also that many of you've seen squatters. Situations with squatters taking up residence in people's homes. Um, just last night I was seeing some here in Houston. Well, one of the suburban areas around Houston. This black lady had been in her home since the 70s, and some dude went in and falsified some paperwork and actually had her kicked out of home. Now, sadly, in this situation, it was a black guy who did it. And, my wife and I talk all the time about we being our own worst enemy. I'm not saying he should have did it to anybody, but why do we continue to do each other wrong? But, right now you can see about squatters. And see, squatting became a big thing during a California gold rush. I mean, guess who it was started by? Europeans. And see, Europeans actually laid claim to lands all over the country that belonged to the indigenous people. And see, your lovely Democrats at the time didn't like the term squatter. So they would actually call them settlers on the land or of the land, however you want to say it. And see, although Democrats didn't like the term squatter, they wanted squatters' rights. And the Whig Party didn't. The Whig Party was before the Republican. And guess who prevailed? Democrats. Democrats have always destroyed the rights of people while masquerading as champions for the people. And see, the more I study and find out about Democrats, I continue to wonder how we as so-called black people continue to support this party. Right now, I just saw this story this morning, and a woman in New York just got arrested. Her mom had died, and I think this woman was an only child, and so she went down because she was gonna, get the affairs in order. She had plans to actually sell her mom's house, and so she went to the home, and the home had been occupied by squatters. And she called the police. The police initially told all the people that were in the house they had to leave. $1 million house. They left. She changed the locks, and as soon as the police left, some of the squatters broke right back into the house while she was there, saying it was their house. I mean, they literally broke through the door. She called the police back out, and she got arrested because they told us she had to go to civil court to evict the squatters from a place she owned under the landlord-tenant agreement, although the squatters were never able to produce a landlord-tenant agreement. Why did I bring that up? Because this is the same thing Europeans did when they came to this land. They came here illegally, many of them. They occupied land that belonged to a whole group of other people. Some of them paid $5. Some of them claimed whatever land their eyes could scan. And now they are the biggest opponents to illegal immigration. And they are the biggest illegal immigrants here. They want to talk about build a wall to keep illegal immigrants out. Well, a wall should have been built first to keep them out. They are the original squatters. Can I let you in on a little secret? Europeans don't really want to block illegal immigrants. Well, let me say this. The Europeans who own the big Fortune 500 corporations don't want to block illegal immigration. Which European Edomites own most of your Fortune 500 companies? Those who own those companies love hiring immigrants at low wages because it adds more to their profit and bottom line when they can pay the employees low wages. Tyson Foods just closed a plant in Iowa, and now they're getting ready to hire illegal immigrants to work for Tyson. This is the same thing Europeans screamed when blacks were enslaved. Go back to Africa. Send them Negroes back to Africa. No, y'all go back to Europe. See, ruddy people were already here, but plantation owners didn't want blacks to leave. They were earning too much profit off of that free labor to send those hands away. Which European Edomites owned the slave ship? Which European Edomites bribed the founding fathers, especially slaveholder Thomas Jefferson, to keep slavery active? See, that part of history has been conveniently removed from every history book. See, Jefferson co-sponsored a bill in 1776, which would actually have allowed the naturalization of Jews, Catholics, and other non-Protestants as Virginia citizens. But Jefferson, over his lifetime, owned 600 slaves that he never tried to sponsor a bill to make citizens. Kind of like Joe Biden signing all this legislation for everybody else but black people, and Barack Obama signing all this other legislation for other people, but not black people. But I'm not here to talk about that. But Jefferson co-sponsored a bill. Now, it got struck down. Uh, but I want to read you something that Jefferson said, when he was pushing forth with this bill. He quoted John Locke. And, if you've never read anything from John Locke, I'd recommend, just, you don't have to read it. Just go look through some of John Locke. See if you can find some of John Locke's quotes. I'm pretty sure it's some out there. But let me find what Jefferson quoted John Locke to see what. John Locke said, neither pagan nor Mohammedan nor Jew ought to be excluded from the civil rights of the Commonwealth. You see that? Amazing that Jefferson had the nerve to quote this from Locke, while at the same time denying civil rights to blacks. And see, around that time, there was also an abolitionist named Moncure Conway. And Conway said, never did a man achieve more fame for what he didn't do. And, but Conway was talking about the slavery issue because Jefferson is held up as a standard of morality in this country even today. And see, Jefferson wrote his letter because, he wrote a lot, back then they didn't have no television, radio, and all that other stuff, but he wrote a letter to his nephew in 1787. You go back through some of Thomas Jefferson's letters, and he said he told his nephew to be skeptical of those was it facets? They say facets or facts in the Bible, which contradicted the laws of nature. So, what does that say about him and the founders who did nothing to abolish slavery while they held slaves? That meant all of us should be skeptical of him and George Washington. Washington is praised right today too. Both of them, I think, on that, what's that, Mount Rushmore? And I know they praise that, and I have no desire. I've never had a desire to go see it. I don't care. Never. I've never cared about Mount Rushmore. But 1/3 of your founding fathers owned slaves. Now, in Thomas Jefferson's defense, a passage was removed from the original Declaration of Independence, and I have a copy of the Declaration of Independence through the Library of Congress. And what we have now is really a watered down version of it. But I'm going to read this portion of it for you. The deleted words was, he has waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him. And he was condemning George III. the Christian king of Great Britain, and his participation in, the slave trade. And he goes on to say, determined to keep open a market where men should be bought and sold, the lost passage continues. He has prostituted his negative for suppressing every legislative attempt to prohibit or restrain its execrable commerce. Now, you heard that, right? The Christian king. And it was actually the members of the Second Continental Congress who were responsible for that being removed. Like I said, the original declaration is much longer than, that what we learned in school growing up. You know, but Jefferson has been painted as a benevolent father-like figure to his slaves, and they really tried to fix it up with the Sally Hemings story. And they said, I remember seeing a documentary movie years ago. It's been over 20 years ago, and they really tried to paint him as, this great guy. And, he offered Sally Hemings and, all of her descendants, freedom and all that. And Sally just loved him so much that she just refused to go. And that they said, it was the first real example of a great biracial couple. You wasn't no great biracial couple. Sally Hemings was a teenager when he first got her pregnant. And I'm not talking about 17, 18 teenage. I'm talking like 14, 15, somewhere around in there. But they tried to paint him. So, but they said, in what I saw, he told them they could be gone. But he owned 600 slaves. All 600 slaves wasn't Sally Hemings' children. So we can scratch that. And see, history telling us that he was more like a father figure, not a slaveholder. But Benjamin Banneker had a different thought process about it. And since Banneker lived during that same time frame, I think he knew more about Jefferson than any historian. Now, I want to read you because Banneker wrote a letter to Jefferson. And I want to read that to you. Part of it. I don't want to read the whole thing. But Banneker said this. But, sir, how pitiable it is to reflect that although you were so fully convinced of the benevolence of the Father of mankind and of his equal and impartial distribution of those rights and privileges which he had conferred upon them, that you should at the same time counteract his mercies in detaining by fraud and violence so numerous a part of my brethren under groaning captivity and cruel oppression, that you should at the same time be found guilty of that most criminal act which you professedly detested in others with respect to yourselves. See, Banneker asked him, how could you really be a friend of liberty when you denying freedom to slaves? And see, Jefferson responded to Banneker, he's kind of condescending, and, he praised Banneker as a credit to the black race. And in telling Banneker that he considered the almanac evidence that African Americans' inferiority was owed merely to the degraded condition of their existence, both in African America. Now, who said blacks were inferior in Africa? Who said that the conditions in Africa were degraded? The conditions in America weren't degraded until Europeans came here. The conditions in Africa weren't degraded until Europeans went there, just like today, like they're doing in the Congo right now. Europeans keep going there to get all the resources, and then they want to talk about black people always backwards, but they go plunder everywhere they go. But when Benjamin Banneker died, Jefferson took a stab at him, and Jefferson said he doubted if any black person could have written the almanac. See, Europeans love to put us down as a people, and you can kind of nowadays, not just they, but it's been going on for a while too. You can lump the Asian culture in that as well, and y'all know when I say stuff, I'm not talking about everybody, but you do have some mentalities that are prevalent as a whole. Y'all understand what I'm saying? But they love to put us down, and they've done so throughout history. Historians, especially white ones, love to praise the founding fathers. What are they really praising them for? They didn't bring any business here. They didn't bring any wealth here. What did any of the founders own other than slaves? They didn't own nothing but slaves. So what did they bring here other than a thuggish mindset? Because they were nothing but thugs. Even though Benjamin Franklin didn't own any slave, Benjamin Franklin said, and I'm paraphrasing, but Benjamin Franklin said, we're not going to do anything to basically uplift those Tony people. Tony means black. We're not going to do anything to help them rise. But they came over here and plundered. So, other than slaves, what did the founders bring to this country? And they didn't bring the slaves here, some of the slaves were already here when they got here because Christopher Columbus had already scoped out the land beforehand, a century before. And so they didn't, like I said, they didn't bring no wealth. Thomas Jefferson house, that house up at what is Monticello, I think it's built so far up a hill, but he would have parties and stuff in his house, and he had a tunnel built under the house by slaves. And that's how the slaves had to come through the tunnels and stuff to serve him and his guests. But yeah, I just went off on a whole nother tangent. And what I started out with, let me get back to my subject matter. So, seeing that these founding fathers came here from Britain and the United States is still under British control, the founders really came here to expand British territory and interests. See, this was never under British control or rule until the first group of colonizers got here. Christopher Columbus and his crew were coming to scope out the land first before the others would be allowed to follow. So they bumped into the Bahamas and immediately claimed it for Spain. Immediately claimed it for Spain. See, was Columbus really looking for a shortcut to Asia, as history has taught us? Or did they already know there were some faraway lands that were not controlled by Europeans and they wanted them? So, what did the founders actually free us from? The 13 colonies were not created until 1607. All of a sudden, when the British came here, they separated the territories into the New England colonies, the middle colonies, and the southern colonies. And then they also threw in Florida, the Caribbean, and Canada. See, the 13 colonies all had similar political, constitutional, and legal systems, and each was largely dominated by Protestant English speakers. You hear me say Protestant, right? See, ironically, all of these places had slavery as the political, constitutional, and legal system. So, why were we all of a sudden fighting a war to come from under the very thing that was brought here? They fought a war supposedly to free themselves from British control. Well, shouldn't a country at conflict with itself, slavery, been fighting a war against the tyranny that permeated and dominated this land? But why would the founders, as great as the system taught us they were, fight against their own economic interests, with slavery being their lifestyle creator? There was no British system of politics and control before these people came here. See, in 1606, King James I of England granted charters to the Plymouth Company, and the Plymouth Company was allowed to colonize the land on the eastern seaboard between 38 and 45 degrees north. And then the London Company was allowed to colonize the land between 34 degrees north and 41 degrees north along the eastern seaboard for the purpose of establishing permanent British settlements in America. How did a foreign entity give permission to his people to colonize land that didn't belong to him or any of the other Britons that came here. They were given permission to colonize places that didn't belong to them. And when the founders gained control, they said they had to fight the Revolutionary War to free the colonies from Britain. So they waged a war to free themselves from themselves. Make it make sense. See, the land was not under British control until whites started coming here with their perceived ideas of what they thought was right. Theft. Did you hear me say theft? Let me say it again one more time. Theft is what they thought was right. They have plundered every dark skinned inhabited land everywhere on this earth. They have gone historically. The only wars you can find of any dark skinned people before the Revolutionary War in the history of this world, not going back to the biblical days, is Ethiopia in 1527. And you had three Navajo wars, um, three different time periods. Spain, Mexico, and the last one being against guess who? America. So why was the first Navajo war against Spain? Why was the last Navajo war against America? So in a 226-year period from 1500 to 1775, right before the Revolutionary War, there were 427 wars or conflicts around the world, and darker skinned people were only involved in four of them, and two of those four conflicts were against Europeans. So who are the real dregs of society while society wants to label blacks as savages? Some of these wars were even waged by white Protestants, white Christians. See, everywhere Edomites go, a military conflict always follows. Always follows. Everywhere, every time. Historically, it has never failed. Name one place they've gone where conflict has not followed soon after. Look at all the military bases America has around the world. See, this piece of land, Turtle Island, was not owned by whites originally. This land had no military conflict before whites got here. This land was peaceful before whites got here. This land never had any major bloodshed before whites got here. The people who lived here lived a communal lifestyle. A communal lifestyle is one where each person got along, they cooperated, they bartered with each other, and all of a sudden here come these Europeans with their socialistic, feudalistic, communistic, and capitalistic mentality. Now, I don't care what we've been taught, slavery was not built on capitalism, even though many believe because blacks were at the time were exploited as capital. Slavery was built on a hybrid economic system disguised as capitalism. Sure, capitalism allows great income to be generated. Pure and true capitalism allows it among everyone who is able to participate. That's with no restrictions. Crony capitalism only allows it for certain groups of people. But looking at the type of capitalism we have in this country shows that Europeans want to be the only ones controlling the capital. They want capitalism for themselves and feudalism, socialism, and communism for everybody else. Slavery. There was a guy, George Fitzhugh, and I mentioned George Fitzhugh in my book, but hey, what do I know? Available at Amazon, Barnes and Open through me, Myron Jones at Gmail. But George Fitzhugh really opened my eyes to some things. And I forget off the top of my head what year George Fitzhugh wrote this book. I can't even uh Slavery in the South or Socialism in the South or something like that. George Fitzhugh, I can't remember off the top of my head. But in that book he wrote that the best form of slavery is socialism. And he said the Negroes were happy being taken care of by Europeans. Now I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember exactly how it was. And see, he said Negroes enjoyed Europeans being in control. And, over the last decade, and I'm talking about while we living, the last 10 years, 10 to 15 years of our life, the party heads of the socialist and communist parties right here in this country said they were suspending their party platforms because the Democratic Party had already adopted all of their party platform, going all the way back to the 60s. Now, what was going on in the 60s, Negroes? Civil rights. But the Democratic Party was already in bed with the Communist and Socialist Party. See, y'all got to do a little bit more study. Go read Kent Steffens' book, Bondage of the Free. Go read the book, The Black Image in the White Mind. Go read the book, White Over Black. Go get you some reading. Go back and find out what former socialist presidential candidate Norman Thomas said in the 60s. Look at the calls for more socialism in this country by billionaires over the last few years. This country has never been capitalistic. It has always been socialistic because you have always had one group of people, European Edomites, dominating since they came here and changed the rules from communal living to their uh, type of living, which was plunder and theft. And their domination was built off of lies, coercion, deception, and theft. See, the type of capitalism in this country is nothing more than nepotism. And do you realize what time in history nepotism became a word? In the 1600s. It's a 17th century word, the 17th century, right after slavery started to gain serious momentum in this country. See, that's why they were trying to breed. It was not just to increase profits, it was also so they could pass slavery on to their sons and they could keep the family business going. Guess where the word nepotism or the practice of nepotism originated? France. What is France a part of? Europe. And see, just so you know, communal living and communism are not the same thing. I had a brother in the faith years ago try to tell me communal living and communism was the same thing. They are not. Communal living is cooperative living. So why would we be fighting to come from under British control when Britain initially had no control over here? They started coming here in 1492 when Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So for centuries, there was no British control or monopoly here. Now, in my opinion, they started the Revolutionary War to assert themselves as the dominators of this society because we never came from under British control. And since everything is connected, I would not be doing justice without mentioning this. The Black Regiment was a group of patriot preachers from every Protestant denomination located throughout colonial America at the time of America's fight for independence, who preached the biblical principles of liberty and independence. See, this is the description given to them by some other patriot pastors. I mean, it's laughable to me because they were more in line with teaching Christian principles, not biblical principles, because biblical principles would have shown them what they were teaching was not sound doctrine. Biblical principles would have shown them they had to be preaching freedom for everybody, not just the shackles of Britain. Christian principles taught that they wanted freedom from their supposed oppressor, but keep the Negroes bound at the same time because many of those patriot preachers owned slaves as they taught that it was their Christian duty to keep blacks subjugated. See, the moniker Black Regiment stems from the tenets of these patriot preachers to wear long black robes in their pulpits. And the pulpit ain't biblical either. So we had a group of patriot preachers who were preaching about living in independence in order to free America from the shackles of Britain, but these same patriot preachers are nowhere on record preaching against the enslavement of the ruddy colored people in the same country. See, white people love to say they fought to end slavery in America. Well, who ran and dominated the slave trade in America? White people. There was no slave business in this country before Europeans got here. No, there was servitude, not slavery, because servitude is biblical. And I know you've heard me say ruddy a couple of times because there are many folks out there who say ruddy is just a white person with rosy skin or cheeks. No, ruddy is what black people were called in the Bible. Now, if you don't believe me, go whatever search engine you want to. Type the word ruddy in. Click on it, then click images, and then tell me what you see. and what people you see. See, I'm not your enemy just because I tell you the truth. See, I don't have a problem with anyone as long as they are not mistreating me. Even if you think bad of me, if you keep it to yourself and you're not telling me you think bad about me, I don't have a problem with you. Keep it to yourself. And see, I don't have a problem with you. As long as you're not mistreating me. I've told you before that all of my brothers and sisters, as long as you do right by me, and I'm going to do right by you. See, I don't like hypocrites. And I'm going to close out with something from Frederic Bastiat. And he said, individuality, liberty, property. This is man. And in spite of the cunning of artful political leaders, these three gifts from God precede all human legislation and are superior to it. Life, liberty, and property do not exist because men have made laws. On the contrary, it was the fact that life, liberty, and property existed beforehand that caused men to make laws in the first place. Hope you have a great day. I'll talk to you later.